Bad color theory will not only ruin your character designs, but also your work. Why do you have to be so dramatic? What do you mean? This is some darn serious business. Who are you to tell me that the stakes aren't high? I am you. Anyways, today I'll be blessing y'all with a video on everything you need to know to pick the right colors for your character design. Color theory is easy to understand but hard to implement. When I was first learning color theory, I would watch all the basic color theory tutorials, but once I finished the design, I would then feel stuck on what colors to pick. It always felt like there was something missing from these color theory tutorials, because no matter what I did, my character design would always turn out looking like some stale piece of bread. Through the years of working on indie games, I discovered that there are two things that these tutorials often miss. And because of that, my character designs always look like doo-doo. So this tutorial is gonna give you everything those videos did not, so that you too will stop making doo-doo looking characters. Let's get started, shall we? First, we gotta go over the most boring part of this entire video, the basics of color and the basics of theory. Why, you may ask? Well, it's because it's important, and because science is important, and because, yeah, we get it. Move on already. Okay, color. Color is pretty much light bouncing off objects. And light is just an electromagnetic wave that our eyeballs can see. Our eyeballs use these two types of cells called photoreceptors in the back of our eyes to detect different wavelengths or light. The cones detect hue, or what the color is. There are three of them. Ones that detect red wavelengths, ones that detect green, and ones that detect blue. And then the other photoreceptors are rods, and they detect value or how dark or light something is. Hold up, why are you talking about anatomy? This has nothing to do with color. Are you sure about that? Well, yeah, that's what I thought. Shut up, because this part is cool, okay? Each photoreceptor sends its own distinct signal to our brain. Let's say there's a green light shining in your eye. Your green cone receptor would send a signal to your brain. But what if that light was yellow? Your eye doesn't have a yellow photoreceptor, so your red and green cones both send signals to your brain because yellow is kind of red, but also kind of green. But what if there's a red and green light shining at the same time? Well, both the red and green receptors would send a signal to your brain, and your brain still interprets it as yellow. Wait. Are you saying that we can only see three colors and our brain makes up all the other colors? Yes, all those other light waves out there, and we can only see three of them. Boy, that's kind of sad when you think about it. Think of all the colors we are missing. Why do you think all of our screens and file formats are in RGB? That's because it's the only thing our eyeballs freaking see. The real question is, what are we not seeing? Whoa, calm down. This is not a conspiracy video about our human bodies, okay? But it could be. Okay, moving on. As I said before, color is light bouncing off of objects. So whatever wavelengths are absorbed by an object, we do not see it. This gives a perceived color to objects because the light bounces off and into our eyeballs. Hold the phone, are you saying that our world could actually be an entirely different color than what we see? Yeah, you know, that's actually highly probable. Are you sure this isn't a conspiracy video about our bodies tricking us of our physical reality? Because I swear, if you tell me that we actually see something that isn't actually there, well, actually, the color purple is not real. Because the visible spectrum ranges between 380 and 740 nanometers, any waves outside of this spectrum we cannot see. Below 380 is ultraviolet and above 740 is infrared. But our brains make a color that is in between red and violet. And that's how we got our lovely modern day color wheel. The crazy part is there is no purple wavelength. It literally does not exist. It is not in our visible spectrum, and yet our RGB cones send a signal to our brain, and our brain is like, purple. So I was right, there was a conspiracy. Okay, yes, but it's not that big of a deal. It's just that our world isn't everything that we see. It's actually what we can't see, and why we can't see it, that's the big mystery. Biggest one being is why are our bodies tricking us from our reality? Is there something we shouldn't see? Are our bodies actually protecting us from our physical realities? Or an even crazier idea, what if our physical bodies are meant to limit us because it's protecting reality from us? You have thought too much about this, haven't you? Yeah, but only a little bit. Let's go over the basics of theory. Theory is a hypothesis that can be considered plausible. In other words, a belief, but a really, really strong one. For example, the Big Bang Theory. There is huge evidence that this theory is true. 1. The universe keeps expanding. 2. There is a measurable abundance of elements. And 3. Cosmic microwave background that permeates everything in our universe. All of this evidence points to the Big Bang Theory being highly probable. But because all theories are just beliefs, it can never become a fact. It can be an explanation for a group of facts, but it can also be disproven by facts. So theories are just hypocritical when it comes to facts. Yes and no, because we need theories to help make sense of the world that we live in. This is so that we can come up with hypotheses in order to test our beliefs of the world against the world's reality. Because theories are just catalysts for us humans to use in order to seek the truth. Now that we know what both color and theory are, when we put them together, we get a belief that there are correct methods of putting visible wavelengths near each other that look pleasing to our brain. Keep in mind that all the information that follows is based on the reality that our bodies are telling us to believe. Always be skeptical. And now with that out of the way, let me show you how to pick the right colors for your character design so that they don't look like doo-doo. The first thing to consider when picking colors for your character is the color hierarchy. It looks something like this with value at the top, saturation in the middle, and hue at the bottom. The reason why value is at the top is because it is obviously the most important. Without value, there would be no contrast and therefore make it really hard to read the image. Saturation is the next important part of color to consider. Even though y'all think it probably should be last, hear me out, okay? The reason why hue is at the bottom is because color is relative. I'm sure y'all have heard this. It is not a new concept. Y'all have seen those images comparing two different colors, or a color looking like one color but is actually the complete opposite of that color. And that's why hue is at the very bottom of the color hierarchy, because it really doesn't matter what color you pick. Hold up, that seems outlandish considering that this is a color theory video. People are deciding between whether or not to use purple or orange for their character's accent color. Well, then you need to think harder about not thinking about a color's hue, because that's exactly why your character design looks like doo-doo. You got your head stuck in a toilet thinking about a color's hue. Pobrecito. Don't worry, I will help you, okay? The first thing you need to do is forget about you. She is long gone, okay? Bye-bye. Don't worry, we will see her again soon. And now you're gonna decide between hue or saturation as your main bay. If you're going with value, want to stay in the black to white region and fill in the parts of your design with different values. If you're going with saturation, you're going to pick a singular color and go all the way to where it is the most saturated, and you're going to fill in the parts from that saturated color all the way to gray, only adjusting the saturation. Keep in mind that whatever you picked, value or saturation, you're going to use that later to render with. So just remember what you picked, okay? Now we can start adding hue. I told you she would come back. Wait, but I thought you said to forget about hue. Yeah, and? I thought you said hue wasn't important. Yeah, and? But I thought that, okay, how to pick the right hue. Spoiler alert, it doesn't matter. Second spoiler alert, color palettes don't matter. But you know what? I'm feeling generous. So I'm gonna give you some strategies on how to pick the right hue. First of all, in case you didn't already know, colors are cool. Also funny. And they're also warm. Cool colors are higher in energy, whereas warm colors are lower. You can tell from the wavelengths. Even if a color has a low energy wavelength and is considered warm, it could still be considered cool compared to the color next to it. The idea of warm versus cool is actually pretty great because you can throw your character into any color field and you can get it to look similar to the original just by adjusting the warmth and coolness of a color. It's not an exact copy, but you can get a pretty similar result, which is pretty neato in my opinion. If you're not inspired by now, you are not thinking about warm and cool colors correctly. Let me put it like this. Messing with a color's temperature frees up your ability to choose the right color. You can literally express yourself however you want. You legit can just use your favorite color for all of your designs and each will still look drastically unique from each other, all because the color temperatures are different. Okay, so your mind should now be blown. Let's move on to the value of hues. It should be pretty obvious, but colors have value. Nah, yes, Tink. Yellow has the brightest value, while indigo has the darkest. You can lighten the value of your image through shifting the hue of a color in order to keep the saturation. This is kind of more relevant to all of y'all who pick saturation for your character, but you get what I'm putting down. You can also pick colors based off of color combo. Y'all already know these, so just a quickie refreshy. Monochromatic color combo. Not really a combo because it's only one color, but if you're having trouble picking colors, just make your job easier and only pick one. Analogous color combo, pretty much just pick the colors next to each other and call it a day. Complementary color combo, you pick one color and then drag over the opposite color to go with it. Split complementary color combo, pretty much like complementary, but instead you split it in half and you don't even touch the complementary color. Triadic color combo, you pick one color and then two other colors that are equally distanced from each other. And lastly, tetradic color combo, you pick one color and then three other colors that are equally distanced from each other. Moving on, if you really feel stuck picking a color, you can just look at the psychology of the color. Wow, you're really scraping from the bottom of the barrel on this one, huh? I'm just trying to give them all the different strategies. Some people have a very hard time making a decision. And do we still tease them? Yes. Yes, we do. A color can make someone feel something for a short amount of time. There is legit studies on this. People don't feel that way for a while, but people do feel something when they look at a color. For example, people often associate the color red as the color of love or passion. But because colors have different meanings for each culture, it's kind of hard to validate slapping a color on a character just because of some meaning behind a color. Unless you already have a specific market for your character, or if you're Disney and you like to use green for all your villains. Okay, so I don't have any more tips for picking the right colors, but I do have a quick strategy for how to grow your colors that you picked on your character. I'm sure y'all heard of this. It's the 60-30-10 rule. 60% of your design is one color, 30% is another, and 10% is the accent color. And if you picked value, you can have different dark or lightness of your one color. And if you pick saturation, you can have different gray and chroma for your one color. Okay, now we are at the last and final step for this color theory tutorial. How to pick the right light. And this is only relevant to all of y'all who plan to render your character design. So if you only needed to figure out flat colors for your character, you could just stop watching this video. Unless you're curious about how to render your character with either saturation or value. So the first thing we need to figure out is the light source. If you live on Earth, we have the sun, which is our main source of light. And depending on where or what time you're visiting on Earth, the sunlight will change color. But hold up. Are you now addressing extraterrestrials who have not visited Earth? Yes, because character design is super inclusive and I refuse to be xenophobic to all aliens. However, I must admit I am partial towards humans. Anyways, the sun changes color starting at twilight or the early morning. The sunlight is cool. Towards the afternoon, the color shifts to white, making everything bright and saturated. And then at sunset, the light is warm. There are other lighting scenarios on Earth like overcast and moonlight. Moonlight is light reflected from the sun onto the moon, so the light is way less intense, and because the light is so weak, we humans don't see that much color in the moonlight. Overcast is when there is no direct light and all the light is diffused because of the clouds. All the local colors are clear and distinct. And finally, there are artificial light sources like light bulbs or fire. The only thing you need to note is that a colored light changes the color of the character. This is easy to show with throwing an overlay layer on top. Also, note that the closer the light source is to your character, the more intense the color will be. Now that you have chosen your light source, you can now choose your color exposure. This is more of a stylistic choice depending on what exposure you like to use. For overexposure, everything is brighter and you can see all the details in the shadows, but less details in the highlights, and more of the colors are grouped toward white. For underexposure, everything is darker and you can see all the details in the highlights, but less details in the shadows. And more of the colors are grouped to black. For correct exposure, everything is balanced and details are distinct in both highlights and shadows. So there is more distinction between different colors. All of this color exposure relates to how you go about rendering your character. Remember when you picked your colors based off of value or saturation? Well, this is where your choice now determines how you're gonna go about rendering your character. If you picked value, you're gonna be rendering your character with more gray tones than saturated color. Even though your color range is limited, your values are not, so you can have a big range between dark and light parts of your design. Two great examples of artists that use values to design with are Jude Smith and Anthony Jones. Another good example would be League of Legends splash illustrations made by Jennifer Woosling, and an example of a game that uses value would be Hollow Knight. If you picked saturation, you're gonna render your character with a lot more color and with a greater range in color saturation. But your values are a lot more limited, so you don't get those super dark shadows or really bright highlights. This is a rendering method I lean more towards myself, but probably the best example of an artist that used saturation to design with would be Nicholas Cole. And another great example would be the illustrator Lowish, and an example of a game that uses saturation would be Animal Crossing. And now you will forever be comparing whether or not a piece of media is saturation or value focused when it comes to colors. Welcome to Outside the Color Matrix. Now, when it comes to your rendering process, I leave that up to you because it depends on whether or not you picked value or saturation, but I will give you two rendering tips that you might find helpful. The first is subsurface scattering. Areas with less material, more light passes through. For example, with a lit candle, the very top where the flame is, it is brighter than the bottom. One, because it's closer to the flame, but two, because the wax burns from the center out. Human flesh is also the same. When you look at ears in the sun, they are brighter in saturation than the forehead. And when you shine a light through your fingers, the tips are this bright red color. Because there's less flesh in our ears and fingertips, so this makes it possible. Wait, are you saying we all are slightly transparent? Yes, and it's a good thing too, because if we were more transparent, we would just be seeing everybody's guts. Which could actually be cool. The next rendering tip is probably something y'all have already heard, which is bounce light. It's pretty much light that bounces off an object and onto another object, the most common example being the blue sky. Whenever you look at shadows in the sun, they look blue because of the light bouncing off the sky and into the shadows. The same thing happens with things next to each other. For example, say your character has a red skirt and white top on. Because the skirt is close enough to the shirt, there would be some light bouncing off the skirt and onto the shirt, making parts of the shirt pink. This is especially evident if it's a super reflective material like metal, because it will catch bounce light like crazy. But the really crazy thing about color is that there has been a long-standing argument between people who think color is subjective versus those who think color is objective. How in the world is this even possible? They are polar freaking opposites. Well, we already went over that color is an electromagnetic wavelength that we can visibly see, so this makes color objective, but color itself can be debated. For example, each culture has a different name for the color red, and each of us knows what the color red is, but what if we all see color differently? Like, your red could actually be my blue. And the reason why we don't know if we're seeing the same red is because we all point and label that color as red. Not to mention people who are colorblind. Who knows what colors they're seeing or not seeing? But not only that, the fact that we only have 3 cones and these cones send signals to our brain, and then our brain makes up whatever that color is and how it is perceived. If that's not subjective, I don't know what is. And yet there is still the legitimate reality of electromagnetic waves. Well, what do you think? Is color subjective or objective? So subscribe for more conspiracy, character design videos, and I will see you in the next one.